But that mission may be expanding yet again as the president says he needs more troops for Afghanistan, and who knows where this whole Iranian business is headed. Well, I believe these guys may have some ideas. Charlotte Hayes is senior editor at the Independent Women's Forum. Susan Page, USA Today Washington Bureau Chief. Kevin White.
Funny name, but what they're doing is not...
Does me hurt the troops? The bill says that you can't send troops to Iraq without adequate training, equipment, and rest.
Don't
interrupt me here. Because 3 weeks ago, military leaders came forward and testified in Congress that we don't have enough troops to, we don't have enough trucks to support the troops in this surge. So if you want to talk about supporting the troops, you don't put troops in harm's way without the right support. And if the president and the defense secretary and Dick Cheney and people on your side are going to take that responsibility, well, then I praise Murtha for stepping up to the plate.
It's called the slow bleed, and it'll have troops stranded there without support, David. It won't help the surge.
Withdrawal, which is the Democratic preferred alternative, or many Democrats' preferred alternative, it sounds a lot easier than it actually is. And there are some really, really difficult questions that have yet to be answered about how you prevent a much larger war that might involve some of the neighboring countries. So there's a lot of things.
At the risk of moving into cliche land, the devil is in the details on that. We have to move on, but when we come back, finally, a deal with North Korea. So then why aren't more people outside the administration celebrating? This is Eye on Washington.
Well, I think what caused it was that the administration was desperate for an achievement, and this is a great achievement for Kim Il-jung. We had it in a corner. We had that regime isolated. It's a terrible regime, starves its own people, and now we're supporting it. We're going to give it 50,000 tons of fuel. That's just the beginning. Now that it's no longer officially on the axis of evil, or other countries will support it. And look, this means less than the paper it's going to be written on. Nukes are a way of life.
Wait a minute, you had to make some deal with them, didn't you?
We had to keep them isolated.
They had a nuclear test in October, isolation.
And they'll have another nuclear test when they need more money.
Excuse me. They had a nuclear test in October. The policy obviously was not working. It was going in the opposite direction. With states like these, what you have to do is try to keep them at a slower pace as possible, have diplomatic initiatives, carrots and sticks, and try to actually hope for positive change in the politics. Because, you know, thanks to the war in Iraq and other things, you don't have much of a military stick to use with these people anymore.
I'm very curious as to the vitriol of the reaction that against this deal, which
from people who are supporters of the administration, members of the administration,
but there is nothing that can restrain Charlotte Hayes right now. What is wrong with this deal?
Well, look, they're going to cheat again. They were cheating on the agreed framework.
Should there be no deal at all with them ever? No deal ever?
I think the ultimate thing you would want is reunification of North and South Korea. It's a fragile regime, and we're
okay, but they've got a nuclear weapon. They tested it once, and don't you have to make some sort of agreement with them?
Derek, when they need more money, when that 50,000 tons is gone, they'll test another one.
Well, you know,
nukes is a way of life for this country.
Listen,
if Osama bin Laden had the money, he could buy a nuke today from them.
Well, then our policy of the last few years has only made it easier. So this is at least a change in trying something new. Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. Okay, now the thing with North Korea, Massachusetts, because all the Republicans there are not supporting him, and he had to do it in Michigan. I still think we're far away from a mitt is it surge.
He might have a lot of explaining to do, but he has assembled a pretty impressive back engine to power his campaign so far, and some early fundraising successes. And obviously in the early days, that's a very important factor that is the reason no one's counting him out yet.
A term we have not yet heard on Eye on Washington, back engine.
I think he's underwhelming. Here he was making this announcement in front of all these obsolete automobiles. I think he's got to address the Mormon issue better than he has. There was some sort of spooky about saying I'm a child of God and thinking that addresses the issue. I don't think it's a big issue. I don't think Americans really care about the religious issue, but I think you have to address it.
Well, the polls say at least a quarter of folks suggest that they will not vote for somebody, or would be less likely to.
If that question were rephrased, would you vote for a Mormon who's running against Hillary Clinton? I think the results would be different.
That's a fair point.
That's certainly true, but here's what we found. 24% said I wouldn't vote for a Mormon, which is a hurdle for him to get over. Maybe it's one he can get over. 30% said they wouldn't vote for somebody who'd been married 3 times, as Giuliani has, and 42% said they would not vote for a candidate who was 72 years old, which is where John McCain will be.
So basically the Republicans have no one to run.
The electorate doesn't like old guys and Mormons.
No, but in terms of the fight for social conservatives, Mitt Romney, you know, obviously couldn't run against Giuliani, who supports abortion and gay rights and gun control with the same platform, so he flipped to run as a social conservative, but he's up against Sam Brownback, who actually is a social conservative. You know, he's never been unsteady about this. So when you go to Iowa and New Hampshire and the social conservatives there, I don't see any reason.
At the same time, Romney is considered, at the very least, a second-tier candidate. We argue about these tiers. And Brownback is on third or fourth tier.
I think that's just because he looks good in a suit.
You know, it takes a lot of money to run for president, and Brownback does not have, so far, demonstrated an ability to do that.
And Romney has raised some money.
Romney has, absolutely. He's shown an ability to raise money, and he does have something of a record to run on, both in Massachusetts and with his experience in the Olympics.
But the true believers of the Republican Party, the social conservatives, religious right, they really need a home. They don't have one so far. They don't have it in Giuliani or McCain, despite their best efforts to reach out. You know, some of the pragmatics amongst them will go to that, but in terms of the grassroots, and they got to go somewhere, and if it's not Mitt Romney, maybe it's Brownback.
Where can they go?
Well, listen, I think it's always very risky to run a pro-choice Catholic because the hierarchy has no choice but to speak out. That said, Giuliani is very conservative on certain other social issues. He brought down crime in New York. He did it in the teeth of the ACLU and liberals. But you still have a pro-choice Catholic, and that's hard.
A thrice-married pro-choice Catholic.
Thrice married, not a phrase we used until this campaign.
If he's running against Hillary, I think he could be in his fourth marriage.
All right, let's ask this question. I want to put this question out there. David Corn, what Republican do you fear most in 2008 if you were running a campaign for a Democrat?
Dick Cheney. He just scares me. I think the Republican side in some ways is more interesting than the Democratic side because there is no natural fit. Say what you want about Hillary, Barack Obama, or John Edwards. They all are somewhat a natural fit, whoever wins out. On the Republican side, the Republican base is going to have to make an accommodation. And with McCain, age is an issue. With Giuliani, the issues we talked about. So at this point, I don't see anyone.
You're not scared of video. You're not scared. Okay, let me ask Charlotte Hayes. Which Democrat do you fear most?
Well, I think we know the answer to that.
I know the answer. It's Hillary because I think she's got a really good chance at being president. We've got 45% for her starting out, 45% for the Republicans, and it's that 10%. And you know, unless she makes a big mistake, she may very well be President Hillary.
I think it's pretty clear that Giuliani would be the strongest general election candidate if he could get through the Republican process.
We should note that when Giuliani thought about running for senator against Hillary Clinton, that was the one person that people thought could have beaten her in New York. We have to move on. Al Franken for U.S. Senate. Need I say more? This is Eye on Washington.
He's the weak incumbent Republican who won Paul Wellstone's seat after Paul Wellstone died, and Al Franken wants to take back what he calls Paul's seat. If a grade B actor could run for governor, not once but twice in California, we'd have Ronald Reagan and Arnold Schwarzenegger. There's no reason why a talk show host, a comic who went to Harvard, and he's clearly a smart guy who cares about policy issues, can run for the Senate. He's up against a primary fight there. A well-financed Democrat will be running for him. And the state, of course, once elected Jesse Ventura. So the question,
they'll never live down.
So the question is whether that will help him become an unconventional candidate, or they'll say no more of that.
We've done enough of that. Kevin Whitelaw, what do you think?
Yeah, the real question is, is this the state that elected him or soured on Jesse Ventura? And so we will have to see how the voters react to that. And you know, Al Franken also has many things to overcome in terms of appealing to a wider swath of folks.
And plus, there's all those videos of Stuart Smalley and all that he's got to do, Susan.
He certainly comes in with some negatives and some possibilities so you could exploit in ads. But yeah, I thought his announcement was interesting. It was about eight and a half minutes of video that they've put out. Not a joke in it. Totally serious. Talked about growing up in Minnesota in difficult circumstances. Talked about the experiences that his wife had growing up with a single mother family, or her father had died, and the help they received from the government that meant that they all have, you know, prosperous middle class lives now. If he can overcome the image that we all have with him as Stuart Smiley, then I think you could look at him as a potentially competitive, serious candidate.
Well, Stuart's the one aspect of him that I really like. Look, this is a guy who argues the battle of ideas by calling somebody a big fat idiot. Still, I think he'll be fairly formidable. Frank Rich, the New York Times columnist, has already said that Coleman is moving away from his Iraq position because of this guy. And I think Coleman had better be really careful about moving too far away, because he might be called a skinny, suave slacker.
Well, okay, but what about the state of Minnesota?
Well,
because it used to be very, very liberal. Walter Mondale, so forth. It's not as much as it used to be.
It's clearly a swing state now. You know, it re-elected a Republican